Another quick question for Andy. There's actually a couple of that have come in this vein.
Yeah.
How do you define the Trinity in contrast to what Dr. Ally spoke about tonight? Or another question phrased similarly, how could we speak of the Trinity, or how would you speak of the Trinity so as to not be a heretic?
Oh, that's a great question. In fact, the great book, actually, I'm really glad that Shabir mentioned kind of heresy, because I completely agree. It is, quite easy to try and describe the Trinity and you invent three amusing heresies before breakfast. And in fact, if you really want to have some fun with this after the evening, get onto your laptops and Google St. Patrick's bad analogies. Few of you know that one. It's a really comic look at some of the bad heresies throughout Christian history. And I promise I won't say, come on, Patrick, to Shabir at any point, for those of you who already know that video. But the book I really like on this actually is called The Cruelty of Heresy by, I forget the author's name, if you put it into Amazon. And what's interesting, he looks at some of those heresies, but in particular shows why they're important. Because if you misunderstand the Trinity, it's not just some vague theological conception you get wrong. Actually, you lose a lot of God in the process. For example, if Jesus does not belong to the identity of God, then actually we can't actually fundamentally know about God. You have a God who is very like the God of deism, or the God of Gnosticism, which has been an influence on the Quran, who is distant and remote. Remember, in Islam, not even Muhammad had God speak to him directly when the Quran was revealed, unlike the Old Testament prophets. In the Bible, you have this God who is earthy and engaged with reality, a God who is immanent, as well as a God who is transcendent. And that gets lost in many other conceptions of God. So to understand the Trinity, I'd recommend take a look at that book. And there's also, because I'm a great believer in recommending resources, if you really want to think through the Trinity as a Christian, a soundbite isn't going to do it. Mike Reeves, Delighting in the Trinity, is a wonderful little book. He's a wonderful church historian. He'll help you understand the Trinity, think about it, and get it right. It's worth reflecting and doing it properly, rather than doing theology by tweet.
And I noticed that Andy, when he had the chance to explain the Trinity, he just pointed to books that explain the Trinity. Perhaps he was afraid that if he explained the Trinity, he might fall into one of the heresies that he talked about. And so this is a difficulty. Now, the difficulty doesn't only come when you try to explain it, but when you come to think about it. Now, of course, we cannot think wrong thoughts about God, and we cannot imagine somebody else to be God that is not God. The Old Testament uses the analogy of marriage for our relationship with God, and turning to a false God would be not only idolatrous but adulterous, according to the Old Testament thinking. So think about your own marriage then. Can you think of some other person as being your spouse, and can you have some confusion as to who actually is your spouse? No. In the mind, it has to be very clear. So when Muslims say that there is only one God, Allah, it is very clear to Muslims whom we're referring to. But when our Christian friends say that Jesus is God and the Father is God and the Holy Spirit is God, there seems to be some lack of clarity. Are these three separate gods? Are there three individuals working together as a team? Is the team stronger than any of the individuals by themselves, and so on? So thinking about it is like walking on a tightrope. You either fall into one heresy or the other. Either you emphasize the distinctiveness in which you seem to have three gods, or you minimize the distinctiveness in which case you fall into Sabellianism or modalism, in which you don't anymore have three persons. You have one God, yes, and you have the three modes of existence, but you no longer have the Trinity, and you do not have actually three persons. And then you cannot explain why was Jesus on the earth worshiping the Father if they are not actually two.